5, 6, 5, 6, 7, 8. Testing the audio. Testing the audio. Thought I'd give you guys an in on my self-production skills here. I'm going to dive into your questions right away. Ben asked last week, what are my views on natural law and these groups forming to live in a society with no ruling class? I love that idea, and I think it's possible, but I think in order for it to work, we have to have a very moral society, or people who, enough people who understand morality. And I think that in order for natural law to work, it would take a few generations. It would take us as parents, grandparents, elders, teaching our children and their children what morality really is. And if you're familiar with Mark Passio's work, he dives into this deep, and I'm a big fan of his work. A lot of people think Mark is extremely intense and passionate and rough around the edges, but I appreciate him. He's no bullshit and cuts right to the chase. He's an ex-Satanist who really understands natural law. So I'm sure, Ben, you're familiar with his work. But yeah, I do think that it's possible. I just think that we need to be working towards morality. And unfortunately, we live in a society that most people don't know it, but they believe in moral relativity rather than moral objectivity. And there is a difference between right and wrong, and it just is. There's no bending it. And most people think that you can bend it based off of religion and political beliefs and whatnot. And it's like, no, if you don't kill, you don't steal, you don't do these basic things, or else you're going to have consequences. And I think it makes total sense. We have to be working towards an objective moral society. And the next question, Rose asked, knowing that the moon is a hoax and that the story of the planets is not what is commonly believed, that would throw astrology out the window. Sometime back, another planet was discovered, all making the astrology belief system, all of them, in my opinion, a carefully constructed story, a prison of beliefs. What do you think? I think that if in astrology, your moon sign is how you deal with your emotions, and our emotions are what feed this system, right? So I don't necessarily think that the moon throws astrology out the window, but I think it changed it. And I see astrology as a blueprint for time on this planet, like a general blueprint, not a super specific one. That's why a lot of times with astrology it can be a little loosey-goosey, but I don't think it throws it all the way out of the system. I think that the moon was placed to have a very specific effect on our emotions and our body. And my moon sign is in complete conflict with with what the moon normally is placed in. So Cancer is ruled by the moon, and if you know Cancers, they tend to be, they're very in tune with their emotions. And my moon is in Aries, which is like the worst placement you could probably have. But I think it's accurate. I think that, I don't like being told what to do. I'm quick to react. I go from 0 to 100 really quick. So, and I certainly don't let anybody walk all over me. And I feel like that's where that comes from. And when I understand somebody's moon placement, it usually makes a lot of sense. it probably, whenever the moon was created, it probably did change not only our emotional selves and our bodies too, because, like a woman's cycle is based off the moon cycle and stuff like that. So it probably changed our bodies, our emotions, and I think it changed the time blueprint somehow, if that makes sense, but I don't think it throws astrology completely out the window. If there was another planet to come tomorrow that we saw every day in the sky, it still might have an effect on astrology, and it would be like a new system, kind of, but an altered, distorted one. Next question is something I think about all of the time, and I'm so glad that this was asked. This is why I'm doing the questions thing, because I feel like I'm not a know-it-all. A lot of the answers I'm going to give are just from personal experience, but I love when I see questions that I think about and ruminate about all the time, and they pop up here. This is a question I've wondered from David as well. Right at the end of this week's show, you say you will find a way out of here. My question is, why do people who view this place as a trap want to bring children into this place if it's such a horrible place to be? I long to get out of here as well, and I have 2 children myself, so I'm in this weird spot also. When I didn't have children, I kind of subscribed to the idea that, well, if I don't have kids, it might be because, my higher self doesn't want to get tied to more karma here. And I understand why people think that, and maybe that's true to an extent. But I also believe that if we come from families that have generational trauma, which most do, to a certain extent at least, if we come and we are a breaker of that cycle, and then we have children who are birthed from a parent who has broken, maybe not everything, but a lot of it, then what you're doing is healing your family line for those who do come back. So I see that as a good thing. So it might have something to do, if I had to guess, it might have something to do with wanting to help heal your family line. And just, on a more surface level, children bring so much happiness, and they're an extension of us. And for me, like, I hope my kids turn into a better version of what I am, in their own way. And I never expect them to they don't have to even be anything like me, but I just want to see them be better. And so that's my thought on that. Jen asked, what about animals in regards to escaping the reincarnation trap? Do they have a way out? Sometimes I sense they know something we do not. What are your thoughts? I think it's like us I think it's like us where they can, but I actually think it's harder for them only because they're living in their lower chakras, basically. Most of them are in survival mode, for the most part, unless they're pets that are taken care of. Then maybe they have time to like soul search. But they're living in a predator prey system more than we are, even, I think. And when you are constantly in fight or flight mode, I think that takes you out of being able to ascend. So I think that it's possible. I just think that it's probably a little bit harder for animals. And then Kevin was asking about when I was talking about the 6G, he said, doesn't the graphene from the jabs amplify 5G to 6G? Yes, that is part of what's happening. But when I was referring to 6G, I was talking about the actual like public rollout of 6G, where it's, on your phone and moving from the internet of things to the internet of brains or internet of bodies, and that full implementation. But I am talking to a few people who really understand what's going on with the jabs amplifying the 5G to the 6G, and I'm not well versed enough to speak on it like an expert by any means. So hopefully we'll have them on soon. I obviously am doing the show mostly by myself lately because it seems like you guys are enjoying that, and these questions took longer than normal, but it's fun. I like seeing what you are ruminating on and thinking about too. It's really cool. So sorry if that took longer than normal, but we're going to get into the episode, and I'm going to try to move through things pretty fast. So on my X feed, it is nothing but fuck the Jews, it's the Jews, everything's the Jews. And, I've shared my thoughts on Zionism and Israel, and I'm talking about how I think that there's going to be a Noahide law takeover throughout the whole world. So there's definitely red flags that I've raised. But in no way do I have any issue with any religious person, including Jews. And I feel like my X feed is purposely trying to brainwash me. I think what's happening is like these digital twins are being made, and they are collecting all this algorithmic data on us based off of who we follow, what we search, and then propaganda is being fed to us on places like X. And I'm seeing all this Hitler love, and these people have no idea that whole movement was controlled opposition, just the way that it's becoming more and more obvious, just like with Trump. I'm not saying Trump is Hitler the way the left does, but anybody who steps into these positions of power, they don't just end up there. And it hasn't been that way for a long time. And if it was that to any degree, they'd be taken out. You know what I mean? They'd be taken out, whether killed or removed, whatever. But even still, even the ones who have been killed and removed were still placed there on purpose, 99.99999% of the time. So what I want to do is go into the Hitler worship and how Hitler was the Rothschild. I brought it up in a previous episode, and David talked about this in 2 of his books years ago, and we're going to kind of revisit some of David's work because he probably feels that it's, there's too many new things to focus on, but I think it's really important to revisit that Hitler was part of this whole system too, because I'm seeing so much of the hate, and the hate is exactly what they want. The more division, the better. And this has to stop. I have no problem with calling out Zionism, calling out the state of Israel, calling out the agendas. But to point fingers and blame a whole group of people, you're putting yourself in a position of being taken advantage of when you do that. So I think that this Hitler love and all of the it's the Jews stuff is a huge psyop to divide us. That's not to say that I don't believe in accountability and calling a spade a spade. In fact, during COVID in 2020, I was sharing a lot of David's work on my Facebook page, and at the time I had hundreds of LA producer, directors, whatever, following me, and they started calling me an anti-Semite. They started calling me all different names. Oh, Bidding, yeah, your last name, you must be a Nazi. And at that point, I knew there was really no going back. And I kind of didn't understand why. Like, I never heard David say anything quote unquote anti-Semitic. And I started getting that same type of treatment for saying, "Hey, we need to all come together. This control system dates way before Judaism was ever even a thing." And I think that's how you get to the truth, is you've got to go way, way back in time. So Hitler worship is just as bad as modern day Israel worship and Zionism. All these evangelical Christians who are Zionists and don't know any better are no better than the people who are falling for this. It's the Jews' psyop. They're both psyops to divide us. And I'm speaking to a group of people who already know this, but I feel like we need to drive it home, and I feel like it needs to be a central focus, because I think right now this is the thing that is causing the most division. There's a really good documentary that came out, I want to say it was like 6 months ago, and Stu Peters produced it, I believe. I'm pretty sure it was his production company. And it's called Occupied. It's a really great depiction of the Israeli occupation of our government and also all the atrocities happening in Palestine. Very well done. Highly recommend it. But I noticed, I'm like, okay, these guys know about this stuff. And none of them mentioned that Hitler was possibly a Rothschild. For me, if you're in the alternative media, even if you don't fully subscribe to that thought, you got to at least consider it. Not once was it mentioned in that documentary. So then I'm like, okay, well, that's a red flag to me. I got to be honest. To not have at least one person say, here's proof that Hitler was a Rothschild. So anyway, I do recommend watching it, but you'll see what I mean. So before I go into David's article, I'm going to tell you how Hitler was a Rothschild. Adolf's father, Alois Hitler, was the illegitimate son of Maria Anna Schicklgruber. It was generally supposed that the father of Alois Hitler, Schicklgruber, was Johann Georg Hiedler. There are some people who seriously doubt that Johann Georg Hiedler was the father of Alois. There was an Austrian document that was prepared that proved Maria Anna Schicklgruber was living in Vienna at the time she conceived. At that time, she was employed as a servant in the home of Baron Rothschild. As soon as the family discovered her pregnancy, she was sent back home where Alois was born. So I'm pulling an article that I think it's from 2003. That's David's. It's 15 pages. I probably won't go through the whole thing, but I highlighted some points. And now that this is becoming a more common topic of conversation, I feel like David should get the credit for calling out that Hitler was a Rothschild, and, you know, that all of these people in positions of power, it's all about bloodlines, because he was talking about this stuff way, way back, and he deserves the credit for it. I'm going to jump down a little bit onto page 3 of this article. Adolf Hitler and the Nazis were created and funded by the Rothschilds. It was they who arranged for Hitler to come to power through the Illuminati secret societies in Germany, like the Thule Society and Vril Society, which I've mentioned before, which they created through their German networks. It was the Rothschilds who funded Hitler through the Bank of England and other British and American sources, like the Rothschilds, Loeb, I don't know how to say that bank, which also funded the Russian Revolution. Loeb, I don't know. Forgive me. The very heart of Hitler's war machine was the chemical giant IG Farben, which had an American arm that was controlled by the Rothschilds through their lackeys, the Warburgs. Paul Warburg, who manipulated into existence the privately owned Central Bank of America, the Federal Reserve, in 1913, was aboard the American IG, indeed Hitler's IG Farben, which ran the slave labor camp at Auschwitz and was in reality a division of Standard Oil, officially owned by the Rockefellers, but in truth, the Rockefeller empire was funded into existence by the Rothschilds. The Rothschilds also owned the German news agencies during both world wars and thus controlled the flow of information to the Germans and the outside world. Incidentally, when the Allied troops entered Germany, they found that the IG Farben factories, the very core of Hitler's war operation, had not been hit by the mass bombing, and neither had Ford factories, another Illuminati supporter of Hitler. Other factories nearby had been demolished by bombing raids. So the force behind Adolf Hitler, on behalf of the Illuminati, was the House of Rothschild, this quote-unquote Jewish bloodline, which claims to support and protect the Jewish faith and people. And I know David says it all the time, but I'm going to drive it home too, because I think that this is such a huge piece of the puzzle that if people start understanding this, they're really going to get the big picture and we can actually finally come together as a human race. But the Rothschilds and the people above them use Jewish people for their own horrific ends. So yes, the Rothschilds were behind Hitler. Hitler was likely a Rothschild, and he had no problem killing the Jews. That is the reality. The Rothschilds, like the Illuminati in general, treat the mass of the Jewish people with utter contempt. They are, like the rest of the global population, just cattle to be used to advance the agenda of the global control and mastery by a network of interbreeding bloodlines impregnated with a reptilian genetic code and known to researchers as the Illuminati. And that's exactly what's happening. So are we to believe, therefore, that although this same group provably funded Adolf Hitler's rise to power and his war machine, that he would be the odd one out, a leader of crucial importance to the agenda who was not bloodline? It's the same thing with Trump. Personally, I think that's why it was a dead giveaway that Kamala wasn't going to get in, because I don't think she's part of these bloodlines. But hold on, Hitler couldn't be the same bloodline as, say, the Rothschilds, because, as we all know, the Rothschilds are defenders of Jewish people, and Hitler slaughtered them along with communists and gypsies and others who opposed him or he wanted to eliminate. The Rothschilds are Jewish. They'd never do that. Oh, really? It's because they're not Jewish. That's the thing. That's what people have to understand. They're not Jewish. They have occult beliefs dating back to before Judaism. That's as simple as I can put it for people who don't understand this stuff. So where did the information come that Alois Hitler, the father of Adolf Hitler, was the illegitimate son of Maria Anna Schicklgruber? Where did that come from? It came from a psychoanalyst called Walter Langer. And Langer's information came from the high-level Gestapo officer Hans-Jürgen Kohler, published in 1940 under the title Inside the Gestapo. He writes about the investigations into Hitler's background carried out by the Austrian Chancellor Dollfuss in the family files of Hitler. Kohler actually viewed a copy of the Dollfuss documents, which were given to him by Heydrich, the overlord of the Nazi Secret Service. The file, he wrote, caused such havoc as no file in the world has ever caused before. He also revealed that the second bundle in the blue file contained the documents collected by the Dollfuss. The small-statured but big-hearted Austrian chancellor must have known by such a personal file he might be able to check Hitler. His task was not difficult. As a ruler of Austria, he could easily find out the personal data and family history of Adolf Hitler, who had been born on Austrian soil. Through the original birth certificates, police registration cards, protocols, etc., all contained in the original file, the Austrian chancellor succeeded in piecing together the disjointed parts of the puzzle, creating a more or less logical entity. A little servant girl, Hitler's grandmother, came to Vienna and became a domestic servant mostly working for rich families. But she was unlucky because she was seduced and she got pregnant. Very early, Vienna had instituted the system of compulsory police registration. Both servants and the employers were exposed to heavy fines if they neglected this duty. Chancellor Dollfuss managed to discover the registration card. The little innocent maid had been a servant at the Rothschild mansion. So she likely got pregnant while she was there. Was Hitler's determination to take over Austria anything to do with his desire to destroy records of his lineage? A correspondent who has extensively researched this subject writes, "It appears to me that Hitler knew about this connection long before his chancellorship. Like his father before him, when the going got rough, the Hitlers went to Vienna. Hitler's father left his home village at an early age to seek fortune in Vienna. When Hitler was orphaned after his mother died in December of 1907, he left for Vienna not long after the funeral. There he seemed to drop out of sight for 10 months. What happened during his 10-month stay in Vienna is a complete mystery on which history sheds no light. It makes sense now that it has become established that Hitler was a Rothschild, that he and his cousins were getting acquainted, and his potential for future family endeavors was being sized up." So was Rothschild the grandfather of Hitler? My thanks to a website, again, this is all David's work. My thanks to a website correspondent for the additional updated information on this article. A man has researched this story in some detail. Alois, Hitler's father, was born 1837 in the period when Salomon Mayer was the only Rothschild who lived in Vienna at a Vienna mansion. Even his wife did not live there, because their marriage was so bad that she stayed in Frankfurt. So his wife didn't live there. Their son, Anselm Salomon, spent most of his working life in Paris and Frankfurt, away from Vienna and his father. Father Salomon Mayer, living alone in the Vienna mansion where Hitler's grandmother worked, is the prime, most obvious candidate. And Hermann von Goldschmidt, the son of Salomon Mayer's senior clerk, wrote a book published in 1917 which said of Salomon, by the 1840s he had developed a somewhat reckless enthusiasm for young girls, and he had a passion for very young girls, his adventures with whom he had to be hushed up by the police. So, I mean, the evidence is all over. And for all of these crazy people on X to be praising Hitler when he was part of a massive plan, wake up. And the whole point of Hitler stepping into power, a lot of people would say, well, what would be the point of all of this? The point of it was to create the state of Israel. So, maybe he didn't even want to kill the Jews. That's not me being a Hitler sympathizer, but he was clearly taking orders from somebody else. And the whole point was to put the Jews in Palestine, and they had to have a strategic plan. It's like, when you know the outcome, you can see the journey. And that is so evident in this situation. For me, the most striking evidence for Hitler being as an actual Zionist, actually, is the Havara Agreement, which was signed in 1933, and it's the most potent evidence of a willful cooperation between Hitler and the Zionist movement. It was a major factor in making possible the migration of approximately 60,000 German Jews to Palestine between 1933 and 1939. Before that was the Balfour Declaration, but the Havara Agreement was what really sent the migration into motion. And here is even Bibi Netanyahu admitting that that was basically what it was about.
Hitler didn't want to exterminate the Jews at the time. He wanted to expel the Jews. And Haj Amin al-Husseini went to Hitler and said, if you expel them, they'll all come here.
Another fun fact is Reichsfuhrer SS Himmler personally visited banker Louis de Rothschild in prison, and he was given special treatment and released. And here's a news article photo of that here. So another really interesting side note that I never really hear people talk about is that Hitler likely had Jewish and or African ancestors. So a journalist and a historian wrote extensively about Hitler and his ancestors, and they did a study. They collected saliva samples from 39 of Hitler's relatives, living relatives. And there are these things called haplogroups, which are sets of chromosomes that geneticists use to define specific populations. So they reported that the relative's most dominant haplogroup, known as E1B1b, is rare in Western Europeans, but very common among North Africans, and particularly the Berber tribes of Morocco, Algeria, Libya, and Tunisia. It is also one of the major founding lineages of the Jewish population, present in 18 to 20% of Ashkenazi Jews and 8.6 to 30% of Sephardic Jews. In other words, Hitler's family tree may have included Jewish and African ancestry. So that doesn't necessarily prove that he is a Rothschild, but knowing where the Rothschilds' bloodlines are from, that would coincide, wouldn't it? So that's always an interesting thing that people leave out. So hopefully that gave you a little insight on who Hitler really was. And I know I've read a lot, but David definitely covered that best. And I recommend reading the entire article. It's 15 pages. It's like a little mini book on it, pretty much. If you do a Google search, David Icke was Hitler of Rothschild, it should come up and you can download the PDF. But we're going to jump into a little bit of what's been happening this week. Everybody's making a big to-do of Donald Trump's phone call to Netanyahu this week, recommending a ceasefire with Iran. And personally, I think it's all smoke and mirrors. If that were true, we wouldn't have sent, just from January to March, I think we've sent $12 billion to Israel of our taxpayers' money for military assistance. So if that were really true, wouldn't we cut off funding to them? But that will never happen. So you can't fund wars that you want to stop, Donald. It just doesn't work that way. It's truly moronic, and I feel like all this word vomits to appease Trump supporters, and a lot of Trump supporters are waking up to that he's not America first. And I feel like this whole charade is just to appease them, to make them say, see, like he will put Netanyahu in line. And that's not the case whatsoever. Not only that, it seems like it's an open invitation for a false flag possibly here, to be blamed on Iran. And then Israel can blame Iran, and then Trump would have to fall back in line, kind of 9/11 style. But I don't know. I'm starting to move toward, we may actually start to see more peace happen, and maybe Trump will seemingly be the peacemaker. And I think if that happens, while that would be nice to have a break from all the bloodshed that we've seen throughout all of human history, if that happens, first of all, I think it would be, they'd still fuel anxiety into all of these scenarios, even if they started backing away from it. Then once we really would see, okay, the peace is actually beginning to happen and we become less anxious, that's when they really go full force with the technocracy and the one world government. Because if we have more peace, I feel like people will become even more complacent than they already are. So maybe modern warfare is completely shifting and old school bombs and stuff will be phased out completely. I think that that's a strong possibility. Because that's the only way I could see people getting even more complacent than they already are, is if like they're like, well, there's no war, there's nothing to fight for, and then this digital prison is being built all around us, and people won't even need to be used for warfare anymore. Everything will be digital, and if they want to kill people, they'll cut your banking off so you can't buy or sell. Modern warfare might be changing. So while that's happening, Trump is suspending all student visas to expand social media screening of international students to the US. And I'm not going to even read the article. You can already guess what that's all about. They're going to see, oh, is this kid pro-Palestine? And let's face it, I'm sure if you had to have a number on it throughout the world, at least half of young people are against what is happening worldwide in Gaza. So they're going to be looking at social media to basically see if that person is going to speak out and speak up. If that person looks like a person who's going to want to have free speech in the United States, they're going to stop it and nip it in the bud before they even come in the country. That's what that's all about. And it's obvious because at the same time, this H-1B visa program is still being rolled out. So he's stopping the student visas, but then the H-1B visas are pouring in at the same time because it's designed to take American jobs away. And most of those jobs will be given to Indian techies who will work for much cheaper. And are they doing social media checks on all those people? I mean, maybe to an extent, but I think that they know they're not going to get pro-Palestine advocates who are willing to speak out against Israel. They're going to get people who are willing to fall in line to get a better job and have a better life in the United States. So you're dealing with two totally different things, and that's why one visa is being stopped and the other one is allowed. So that's it for this week. The beginning took a little bit longer than normal, so apologize for that, but let me know if you like me answering the questions, even if it takes longer some episodes. Hey, I'll even do a whole episode of me answering your questions if you want. If there's enough cool topics, it makes my job easier, and it's fun to see what's on your mind too. So thanks for tuning in this week, and I will see you next week.